Hello and welcome to One on One. Today we continue our conversation with Gillian Lucky, attorney at law. Gillian, we spoke about, of course, the passing and the legacy of Dana Seetahal a short while ago. I wanted to talk, and you've brought some figures with you, but the fact that her tragic death just brings into focus and puts the spotlight once again on the fact that we have a rampant crime problem in this country, and in particular, homicides are of great concern.
Correct.
And it's a situation where that's one thing.
Right.
But in how we handle those homicides from a police perspective and how they go through the system is another cause for concern, isn't it?
It is, and I want to just state from the outset, Vernon, in this discussion, that the crime situation that we are facing in the year 2014 is not something that came upon us overnight. I have been tracking the criminal statistics for the last, I would say, 10 years. And over the 10 years, and if you were mapping it and tracking it, you actually see criminal activity on the rise, and you see detection rates have fallen. So I want to say that when you have this discussion, it's very easy for people to, blame a particular regime or say what the last regime ought to have done and, not done. And my point of view is we don't get caught up in the politics when we are fighting crime. What we need to do is make a determination of what is working and what is not working. And I agree with those persons who say that when you are fighting crime, you have to look at it in a very holistic manner. And therefore, you have to look at what are the societal ills that are contributing to criminal activity in Trinidad and Tobago. And therefore, you have to take the preventative approach. And I appreciate that. I also point out that in dealing with those societal ills and looking at the societal deficiencies, and therefore going into the preventative approach, you also have to look at what is taking place right now and right here in Trinidad and Tobago in terms of criminal activity. Detection rates, I use the phrase, are at an all-time low. When I say that, people point out, well, in one month it might be 18%, in another month it might be 16%, and therefore there's an improvement. And I keep saying we are below the radar when it comes to the detection rate. In the years about 2005 to 2007, the detection rate for serious and violent crime was in the early 20s, so let's say about 22 to 24%. Right now, when you look at our detection rate for serious crimes as reported, it's in the late teens, so you're looking between 15%, let's say 16% to 19%. It's very, very rare that it ever reaches the 20%. I could tell you for the month of March, because I don't yet have the April statistics. For the month of March 2014, Vernon, we are looking at a detection rate of 17%. And that is wholly unacceptable. So that when I hear persons, for example, saying that there has been a reduction in the number of serious crimes committed or reported, I say, okay, that is something for those who want to applaud. Well, go ahead and applaud yourself. But then you should be seeing a rise in your detection rate, in my view, because if less crimes are being committed and you have the same or more resources, then you should be seeing an increase in the detection rate, and that is not happening. So I am not one of those in the category of applauding a reduction in serious crime without an accompanying increase in the detection rate. And I can tell you that this is a matter that Dana and I discussed very often, because, as I said before, whenever I discuss the administration of criminal justice and criminal activity, I always speak about the positive contributions made by persons such as Dana Seetahal. And I remember discussing the very worrying detection rate. It's an all-time low. And very often we would discuss, well, what do we need in Trinidad and Tobago to really send the message that we have and we are able to take a handle on the criminal situation in Trinidad and Tobago? And we often agreed a successful prosecution. In the 1990s, I remember when Mr. Ramesh Lawrence Maharaj, senior counsel, was the Attorney General. I remember him coming to the office of the DPP. I was then in the DPP's office. And we were dealing with criminal activity. The big thing in those days, as you know, the drug trade was a big thing. We had passed very, powerful laws. Some people felt it was draconian laws to deal with the fight against the drug trade. And when he came to the office of the DPP, the question he asked, Dole Chady and his gang, they were alleged to be committing many of the crimes in Trinidad and Tobago, not just drug-related, but also murders. And he made the point, he said, look, what do we need to bring down Dole Chady and his gang? And when we say what do we need, we're talking about within the parameters of the law. And we look at laws that had to be changed. One of them was the whole situation with the Jury Act. And the Jury Act was changed to provide for alternate jurors. Because a big thing in those days, Vernon, was the concern that jurors would be snuffed out. And if you get below the required number in law for a murder trial, it would mean that that trial would have to be aborted and there would have to be a retrial. And of course, when you came back, people would be even more afraid and so. And therefore, you had the creation of what was called the alternate jurors, so that if for some reason a juror cannot continue to serve, then you have an alternate who can step in his or her place.
It points to an interesting interaction, because often we hear about the fact that there's a separation between the DPP's office and the Attorney General's office.
Right.
But it is allowed to have consultation.
Yes, there's nothing wrong with
because there are certain areas of
consultation.
expertise that the DPP would know about and what
Correct.
was needed that the AG
Exactly.
can benefit from.
And he came to us because he recognized when you're fighting crime, the important agencies, law enforcement, so primarily that's your Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. You talk about prosecution. The prosecution is the office of the DPP. And you talk now about the administration of criminal justice, and that's your magistrates and your judges. Those are the three primary agencies. I'm not doubting there are other agencies, for example, for your scientific testing, and so you look at the Forensic Science Center. So there are other agencies that are important, but these are the three primary bodies, and you have to make sure that those primary bodies have the resources that are necessary, and they have the personnel. And therefore, when he came to us in the office of the DPP, he said, okay, what are the laws? What are the challenges you all have as prosecutors? What would make it easier for you to prosecute? And there were significant laws changed in the 1990s. And I am saying in the year 2014, we also have to look at what are the deficiencies and how do we address those deficiencies and how do we fix the problems. And it isn't that our laws are soft, quite the contrary. We have very powerful laws in Trinidad and Tobago. We have advanced to the stage that we now have laws. And I say now, we've had these laws in 2005 to 2007. There was a very aggressive legislative agenda brought to the Parliament, because I sat in the Parliament at that time, brought to deal with the laws of evidence. And in the United Kingdom, what was done by their Criminal Justice Act, the CJA of 2003, that is when really it was felt in England for some time, just before 2003, that the pendulum had swung too much in favor of the defendant, to the extent that it was very difficult to get successful prosecutions. And what was done by that Criminal Justice Act of 2003 is that there was a holistic approach taken as to what laws needed to be revamped, revisited, revised, what new laws needed to be passed. And that was done in England in 2003, and the Criminal Justice Act was something that was proclaimed and implemented in phases. And I'm saying in Trinidad and Tobago, we have laws on the book, but what has happened is we've done it in too much of a piecemeal approach. So what has happened is when you're going to the Evidence Act of Trinidad and Tobago, there have been many amendments and there have been many advancements. For example, in Trinidad and Tobago now, you can have a witness statement admitted into court in evidence, provided certain criteria are met. So it isn't just every statement, certain criteria are met, and the witness never has to go into the courtroom. And there has been jurisprudence on that point. But again, and this is why I say we miss people like Dana Seetahal and many other legal luminaries that we have lost. Why? Because they not only appreciated that the law existed, but they were prepared to test the law. And the only way that a law gets life is when you test it, when you go into the courtroom and you test it. And the judicial officer has an opportunity to look up the law on the statute book and see whether, in fact, the law is not just applicable, but whether, in fact, evidence can be admitted using the particular law that is in existence. In other words, you have to be brave. You have to have a sharp mind, but you also have to be brave. You have to be brave enough to say, listen, this law exists, and this is the law I'm depending on to have this particular testimony admitted into court. And it's either the testimony will be admitted or it will not be admitted, and there will be a reasoning given, and the judge will have to give a decision, most likely in writing. Other judges may agree or disagree if, they have a similar matter brought before them in terms of the evidence. And then if there's that level of disagreement, it can be tested in the Court of Appeal. And that's how you have the development of jurisprudence. But getting back to the whole issue of
crime. This is all great. I mean, we have the laws. We have some great minds. We have one less great mind legally in this country now, of course. But as you mentioned, the fact is you still got to detect the crimes for people to even reach the stage of justice being able to start moving ahead. And
I have argued, and I know this is a very controversial point, but I'm going to say it, and I've said it before, and I say it again, that when SORT, the Special Anti-Crime Unit of Trinidad and Tobago, was dismantled, And I say I understand that it should have been, it should have been operating within a legal framework under some kind of, have some kind of legislative clothing, so to speak. The point I make is, SORT was closed down and everything was thrown out. The baby, the bathwater, the bathtub, the operating theater was shut down, the entire operation. What should have been done is, before SORT was shut down, something else should have been in its place. OPV vessels, they were deemed to be not seaworthy. I would be the last one that would recommend or suggest that we put non-seaworthy vessels to patrol our borders. But after so many years, we have no vessels. Notice I'm not using a period of time that starts May 2010. I'm saying we didn't have before.
This is, yeah.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. We did not have our borders properly patrolled before May 2010. It is just that in May 2014, we still do not have our borders properly patrolled. I am very often on the eastern coast, and the cocaine washed ashore there in sometime, I think it was 2004, 2005. Remember when all the cocaine washed ashore? That is not a patrolled border. So we have ports that are not properly patrolled. Our borders are not properly patrolled. And we have to recognize, people often say, they look at the police service. And I understand why they do, because as I said, that's the primary law enforcement. But you have to look at other agencies and bodies that could also have, and do also have, corrupt personnel. You have to look at customs. You have to look at immigration. You have to look at the defense force. Because when you are talking about unpatrolled borders, you're talking now about other agencies and departments and divisions that are, if there is a corrupt element or rogue element, they would be also facilitating the criminal activity taking place.
But who is looking into those areas? Who has the power to look into those areas?
Well, each of those areas come under the Ministry of National Security, and therefore you have to have policies and you have to have procedures. Something that is growing around the world and also in Trinidad and Tobago is human trafficking. But we always seem to be behind in the fight against crime. And it isn't that we don't have competent people. I have interacted with many persons who work in the various divisions. And I can tell you, I lecture at the Police Academy from time to time. And when lecturing, I get an opportunity to interact not only with police officers, but representatives from, let's say, the immigration department. And we have bright people. There are competent people. We have very highly driven youngsters in these divisions and departments and institutions and organizations who really love their country, who want a safe country, and who want to move forward. And the technology does exist. But SORT was dismantled, nothing else put in its place. And we are hearing now of another entity that exists. And I'm saying, great if another entity exists, but we still have a problem in Trinidad and Tobago. We have information. Even with the killing of Dana Seetahal, and I'm not going to go into any details, all I'm saying is everybody has an opinion, a view. Sometimes people will tell you they know what happened. Trinbagonians speak like this. I could tell you what happened, and by the time you get to say, well, were you there? No, I wasn't there, but I could tell you what happened. So we have a wealth of information. That's just raw data. Our challenge is converting information to intelligence. How do you now? You have to separate those who, it's raw data. You have to separate those who are just giving you the story as they heard it, or they believe it or perceive it to be, as opposed to those who actually are witnesses, those who actually have the evidence. And I'm not just talking now about the human witnesses upon whom we depend, but the use of science and the use of technology to help us fight the crime. So that's the intelligence. And then converting the intelligence now to evidence. So it's always information to intelligence is where we have our challenge. And then intelligence to evidence. For example, people have said, okay, well, give me an example. I say, okay, information is the use of CCTV cameras that would be recording, at a particular place. You look at all the footage, but not all the footage would be relevant to a particular incident. So when you look at the footage, you're looking at information. But you have to convert the information to intelligence, and that is using the relevant information. So of course it will be time-coded, and you'd use that footage that would be relevant to what you're investigating. Having gotten the intelligence, you now have to determine, well, how do you convert that footage that you have now from intelligence into evidence? You have to make sure it's admissible. So what legal criteria must be satisfied for that footage upon which you want to rely to prove whatever point has to be proven or to disprove a point? Because evidence is relevant if it is probative or disprobative of any matter that requires proof. That's the definition of relevant evidence and what is relevant. And therefore, you have to determine now how do you, or what must be satisfied to make the footage admissible in a courtroom. And again, the law states what the criteria. The camera must be properly working. You have to get the person who, of course, looked at the footage, the person who could say, well, yes, this is for the time period. And I'm saying that's what we need to do, that level of science, because the use of CCTV camera footage is something that is very widely used now in courtrooms throughout the region and in the world. Because
and even in terms of policing, it's
exactly.
good that we have it, but it also needs to be monitored constantly as well.
Exactly, and that's the point, monitored constantly. Because having the cameras on, on the various roadways and highways and so, remember, you are seeking to prevent criminal activity from taking place. And if criminal activity does take place, you want to ensure that you catch the perpetrators. So the monitoring is meant, the presence of cameras is meant to deter in the first place. People ought to feel that if there are cameras, let's take a very simple crime. You wouldn't want to break a red light because you recognize, there's a camera there, and it probably could just take a flash photo of my car breaking the red light. So you're meant to deter people from committing crimes. Cameras are also meant to assist when criminal activity has taken place, to give you that visual, to be that independent recording device that is going to tell you what happened or what did not happen, to help you make a determination whether a particular theory is correct or whether a particular theory is far-fetched. So it plays a very vital role. But the world has moved forward now. It's not just about CCTV cameras. It's about the use of so much other technology, the GPS. There are phones and there are phone devices that when you want to use what is called telephony, I think is the word that they call it, when you want to determine a person, where they are, and which cell phones are also in the particular area where the person is. So it's not just about tracking my cell phone. If you and I are sitting here and there's a tracking device on my cell phone, it could also pick up any cell phone that's in the area within a particular limit, of course. So they'd also be able to determine, well, who else was there. Let's just say,
like triangulation, I think.
Yeah. I was in this room. They could then determine, okay, but a telephone carrying this number or cell device carrying this number was also there, and then they'll track and say, okay, Vernon Ramasa was also there with Gillian Lucky at this particular point in time. All of this is now available, and with the level of networking, because right now at the police academy, the FBI agents and representatives are also lecturing to the police. So they are bringing a wealth of knowledge and expertise. And we have officers here who are IT experts. It isn't that we have officers who don't understand IT. We have officers who have that area of specialized knowledge. And that is what the Special Anti-Crime Unit of Trinidad and Tobago is doing. People who would deal with victimology. So they would go on the scene and calm victims and make sure, the victims of crime and the relatives of those who were murdered, for example, are being dealt with. You would have people who would actually go into crime scene preservation. You would have persons who would go in and, they would actually, go through the whole area. And not only would they scope through the area one time, they would go and they would scope through it again. Then you would have those who would sit in rooms in Kumoto, and they would say, okay, these are the facts, let's try to recreate the scene. So you had a great level of specialization taking place, and that's what you need in Trinidad and Tobago.
We also need integration of all these various things. I mean, as you
Correct.
mentioned, we've got expertise in certain areas.
Correct.
But the things don't link together the way they're supposed to, and that's one of the problems, I guess, as well.
Exactly, it is. And that is why we need to fortify the office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. I've said that. I work there, and I've said that, you've got to give the DPP the personnel needed. You've got to give him the resources required. Because as I said, from law enforcement, now we move into the courtrooms. And these are the prosecutors upon whom, justice is being carried on their shoulders. They are ministers of justice. They are not there to get convictions, but they are there to ensure that guilty persons have there's a fair trial, and if a person is found guilty, that, the punishment is imposed on them. That is the role of a prosecutor as a minister of justice. That's why you're said to be a minister of justice, because you are not there to persecute. You are there to prosecute. You are there to ensure that the jury is given all the evidence in the matter, and that the jury at the end of the day, with the directions given by the judge, is able to come to a finding based on the evidence in the courtroom. Then you've got to look at the judicial officers now. You've got to make sure the magistrates, many times we forget the magistrates. The first place that a case goes to, in terms of the criminal law, is in the magistrates' court. And the magistrates' courts, and we've been hearing about the state of the courts, we really have to fine-tune everything. I've been saying for a long time, we need to have one central coroner's court, and I know that has been on, you know, it has passed the drawing stage, so to speak, but we need now to go to implementation. Have one place where all the coroners, all the matters that are before the coroner's courts are heard, so that it's centralized. So if you need to find out, you know, what is happening in a particular matter that has been put for inquest, you go to one place rather than, you know, bouncing all over Trinidad and Tobago and trying to determine what is the status. It's about having proper case management. And you see, these are the things that will send a message to the criminals. As soon as just picture yourself fighting a war, and you see one side disheveled and disorganized, and you see another side, those are the criminals right now, you know, with all their high tech and very organized and using the technology to their advantage. From the time those criminals see that there is now streamlining and focus and organization and management on the other side, it does not necessarily mean that they're going to step up their game. What it means is it is going to force them to, you know, step back in terms of recognizing it's not just a walkover. And also you will get citizens now on the bandwagon, the law-abiding citizens. Because once you show that you are prepared to go out there and, you know, really take control and provide the national security that is required, citizens are going to get on board. Every citizen in his or her right mind will tell you they want to live in a safe place. So you already have buyers, but you have to have crime plans and you have to have your policies, and you've got to think along the lines of, okay, what is going to really restore public trust and confidence? In the 1990s, it was necessary to give the public that level of confidence by showing there could be a successful prosecution of Doe and his gang. And I'm saying in 2014, a successful prosecution of those responsible for killing Dana Seetahal. Show this country that has been so traumatized by her death that we have the resources to bring her killers to justice.
I know you tend to be an optimistic person in general. That's one of your trademarks.
I'm realistic.
But you're also optimistic in your realism. I tend to look at social networks and to see what people are saying. And a young professional, after Dana Seetahal's murder, had noted what it meant to the country, et cetera, and said, we are living in a failed narco state. And this is a young professional.
Correct.
Obviously, that's a bit hyperbolic, I'm sure. But I mean, do you really feel we're heading towards that way, or can we, at this point, pull ourselves from even getting close to that?
I'm of the view that we can pull ourselves out. A failed state does not mean that we can't turn things around. You know, you fail. It's like failing an exam. You have to resit it and get it right and pass. For those who say failing state, and I'm into the failing state belief or category, we have to turn things around very quickly, because when something fails and it stops, it's very difficult to jumpstart and resuscitate and revive it. And I'm saying it can be done. We will not be able to change our course overnight, but we have to get wins. The country, when you're losing, the country needs to get some wins, some level of positivity. And as long as a country sees hope and they see genuine commitment, a country will, the law-abiding citizens will be on board. Right now, many people are feeling two H's, hopeless and helpless. And when people are feeling a sense of hopelessness and helplessness, it's very difficult to get their spirits up to tell them, listen, come, we can do this. And that is why those in charge have to not just take the lead, but they have to prove that we can do it. And that's why, you know, I said to you, it is important, ever since this killing of Dana Seetahal, I've been asking myself the question, what would Dana do? If Dana was alive today, and she read about and she heard about a close friend of hers in the legal profession, and this had happened to that person, what would Dana do? So if we keep saying, what would Dana do, and what would Dana expect, I'm telling you, we would get it right. I picture Dana right now, if she was alive when this had happened, you know, to someone else, but in similar circumstances, she'd be in the helicopter, she would be, you know, with the police, she would be guiding, she would be talking to, you know, members of the legal fraternity saying, listen, this is what has to be done. She'd be offering her services to the law enforcement. And that is what we need to do. We need people to appreciate that unless and until everybody comes on board without worrying about the turf war, right? It's not about a turf war, it's not about egos now. And there's no room for people who are narcissistic in the fight against crime. It's not about blowing trumpets. Because let's face it.
Most of all, it's not about politics, is it?
It can't be about.
Because we all have to live in the same country and deal with the same crime.
About politics, exactly. Yeah. Because when criminals are coming after you, they are not going after you and before they commit their crime saying, well, listen, Vernon, what party do you support? What party do you? It's not about politics. It is about sending the message. And I'm saying this problem occurred and has been occurring for decades, because I'm saying the last time we had any successful gang brought to justice was the Dole Chedi and this guy. I can't think of anybody
shocking
else.
When you think about how
and that's 1996.
Yeah, I remember it
So
well.
if you look at it, you're looking at 20 years down the road. And 20 years down the road, because 2016 will be 20 years. I'm just saying, we're in 2014. Where are we? And look at the detection rate. The detection rate is particularly low. I use the opportunity to ask the FBI officers who visit us from time to time, and also those involved in the, the United Kingdom. There's the Canada, United Kingdom, Trinidad and Tobago tripartite arrangement, in which we get for no payment. In other words, we get the expertise free of charge. And I speak to Moira McDade, who is the UK representative here. And again, she reminds me very much of Dana Seetahal in terms of her drive, in terms of her vision, in terms of, listen, I am here, call on me. You know, those war horses, as Dana was, as Moira is, and there are others in our country, locals, who are saying, listen, put us to the test, put us on the field, we want to get the work done. And we have all this expertise, and the FBI agents who are here, I asked them, what is an acceptable rate in terms of detection rate for murder, and they indicated nothing less than 70%. In fact,
not
we should be about
17%.
Right, and we are at 17. So that's where we are at. But I'm just ending by saying, Vernon, I don't think we have failed. We have a lot of work to do, but we haven't failed. It's not too late.
Well, Gillian, it's been a pleasure having you on this hybrid Just Jill one-on-one program.
I thank you for it.
I hope we can do more in the future. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Vernon.
Thank you very much. You've been watching One-on-One. Join us again tomorrow for another edition.